welcome to today's edition of Velocity Kinetics. Today we are cleaning a car because it's cooled down a bit, thankfully, in the middle of this heat wave, which is rather nice. But that's not what we're here to do today. What we're doing on the vlog today. I'm going to talk about the one thing that a lot of F1 fans get fed up with talking about, and it is in many ways an extremely boring subject. But it's so incredibly relevant to racing, regardless of what form of racing you follow, and it's incredibly relevant to the road, and that is tyres. First, it needs a bloody wash. Well, one job done. Car wash front to back. Spent a long time on the bit around the crevice around the boot because I park under these trees it gets filthy. But I can't really park on the road. There's not a lot I can do. But it's taken me just over an hour or so, I think, to do it single-handed. Let's get some lunch and then we'll talk some tyres if we have time to do it today. But we're going to talk some tyres in a few minutes. So it's a bit later in the day than we planned to do this video, but it is later in the day. So, that black thing back there, tyres. They're really quite an odd thing. Not odd as in, what the hell are they for, they're magic sort of thing. Because they're odd as in, the slightest little change in them can affect how your car corners, accelerates, brakes, handles, fuel economy, you name it. And that's the same regardless of whether you're driving a super mini like this, or whether you're driving a big SUV, or you're using something like a tractor, lorry, you name it. If your tyres aren't in good shape, the vehicle's not going to be working at its best. It's just as simple as that. And it's the same across all forms of motorsport. 2-wheel, 4-wheel, more wheel. If the tyres aren't in good shape, they aren't going to go quick. We saw a couple of years ago in Formula 1 when they had the pink Ultra Soft, or was it purple Ultra Soft? Anyway, the stickiest rubber that would only last about a lap or so. When they were switched on the right temperature window, they were unbelievably quick. And we've seen that over the years in various forms of motorsport, whether the sport uses slick tyres, groove tyres. There will always be one set of tyres that are just so much better than the rest. But sports like Formula 1, in particular Formula 1, have had to slow things down. For instance, for years, Formula 1 was on slick tyres. Through the 60s, well, maybe not quite the 60s because they were using some form of cross-ply, but still, they were using, sort of late 60s, early 70s, on to slicks, 80s, slicks, 90s. That's where the change came in, more or less. They went from slicks to grooved to slow the cars down because they were getting too fast, really fast cornering speeds. But then went back from grooved to slick in 2009, and then in 2012 we had the change to the Pirelli rubber, which is some people have liked. I quite like that generation tyre, but admittedly, having races decided because someone's tyres have just gone off at the last few corners is not quite what it should be, but at the same time, it's the same point if they had an engine failure. No different if they had an engine failure or made a dumb in the last few corners. This most recent weekend in Baku, in Formula 1, they had a number of tyre failures, and it's not the first time in the Pirelli era that we've seen tyre failures. Some of it years ago was because teams were running the tyres at ridiculous toe or camber that Pirelli had not said to do, and we're just using them well outside of what they were supposed to be using them, or at least safely using them. Some people have had them underinflated, overinflated, used the wrong strategy, you name it. Sometimes there's been simple things like debris. Sometimes Pirelli have been the ones at fault where they've made the tyres just too soft, and that's not a bad thing in the sense of how fast they could go, but bad in the sense of a sudden failure with no warning. Then again, it's no different to any other form of motorsport where you can have a sudden failure of anything, and it's no different to if an engine suddenly lets go, because it can happen. And again, that's any form of motorsport. But the crossroads Formula 1 finds itself in is Pirelli. The teams want faster tyres and more durable tyres. They can build them fast, they can build them durable. I don't think they can do both, or at least not very well. Because the problem you've got is you can build a set of tyres that will fit a Mercedes perfectly, get the most out of it. They'll go really fast on them and go really long into the race. You could bolt those same tyres on the AlphaTauri and it could destroy them in 2 or 3 laps. You could then bolt those tyres onto the Williams, and the Williams may never need to change its tyres again. You know, Pirelli have got a hard job trying to make a tyre that fits everyone's requirements in a sport that is not using spec parts, or at least doesn't use spec chassis and things like that, which Formula 1 isn't a spec championship. It is a manufacturer championship, so that is to be expected. But you've then got the argument of, what do you do to stop these failures? Pirelli can only do what they can do, and if they're making tyres the best way and the best compromise, and there's not a lot they can do on the compromise unless the FIA or Formula 1 are willing to make the compromise. The only other thing they could potentially look at doing, in my eyes at least, there might be other ideas that would make just as much sense, but I can't think off the top of my head what it would be. They could maybe look at mandating more pit stops. Now, as it is, they mandate one pit stop to use 2 different compounds of tyre, which I think is perfectly fair and right to do so, because then it creates a little bit of variety. And just because you have to do one stop doesn't mean, if you think a 4-stop strategy is faster, unlikely to be, but if for some reason a 4-stop is faster, you can just keep going into the pits as often as you've got tyres for. But mandating a 2-stop then starts to take away some element of strategy, because whilst you could technically run the car through the pits in 2 separate laps, you could maybe go, if it's a 50-lap race, you could go to lap 20, bolt some super soft tyres on, make up a lot of ground, and then 5 laps later come in, having destroyed the tyres, and bolt another set of super hards on and go to the end of the race. Now, there is a lot of different strategy that can be made through 2 stops. There's a lot of different strategy that can be made through 2-stop. There's a lot of strategy that can't be done through 2-stop. And it's a fine line, because we obviously don't want our sport to be engineered any more than it may already be engineered. It's great when some teams can make tyres just work. Force India, well, when they were Force India, Aston Martin years ago, when they were in the Force India and in the Racing Point days as well, they had cars that were just super great on tyres. Perez, granted a lot of it had to do with Perez, but Perez could make the tyres last just so much longer than anyone else. Paul di Resta could do that in the Force India as well, going back quite a way there. Or the gorgeous Lotus E22 with the far more graceful step nose was just so kind to its tyres and yet so quick. Meanwhile, the Mercedes, it wasn't Mercedes actually at the time, because they weren't as high up the order as they were. This is back in natural aspiration days. Meanwhile, the Mercedes was just chewing its tyres up. And then if we go to the first bit of the turbo era, the Williams was good on its tyres on low downforce tracks because of the low drag, and it didn't shred its tyres like some of the others. High downforce tracks, so with its low drag philosophy, meant it spun the wheels up a little bit too much, and then it was destroying them. So where should F1 go? The logic behind years ago when we had all the tyres from the super hard orange tyres all the way through to the pink or purple super softs was on paper a good idea. As a viewer, it wasn't very good. The simplification to the red, yellow or white wall tyres is far better. Yellow is soft, red is super soft. No, yellow is medium, red is soft, yellow is medium, white is hard. Granted, though, Pirelli keep changing the compounds in between us and they vary it from race to race. do Pirelli look at bringing the same tyres to every race? No, they shouldn't. Because you don't want the teams to know how the tyres work. And if they get on top of, for instance, if we go to a really low downforce track, for instance, we'll use Baku as an example. If you know how the tyres behave on a super high speed, then when we get to a high speed track like Monza, then the element of surprise is gone. Trade-off is if they know how the tyres work, maybe they'll push them that little bit harder. But we don't want races and championships being decided by the number of pit stops being done. Championships have been lost through tyre blowouts. The most infamous one is Mansell's. Williams Honda, it's overtaking Ayrton Senna when he's in the Lotus. The infamous one at Adelaide where the tyre blew at the end of the straight, where Mansell could have won his first world championship, but obviously couldn't. So what does F1 do about its tyre situation? In many ways, the best way to sum it up is how one of my old colleagues used to sum it up. Fuck Nars. But I think what F1 needs to embrace, in many ways how they're looking at the sprint race as an idea for going forward, they need to look at it on an experimental basis. So they need to be open to the idea of changing the tyres. They need to be open to the idea of doing more testing just for the tyres, as in we've got a new compound, do you want to try them out? We need to be open to the idea of maybe having more compounds available at each race. It's right that the top 10 start on the tyres they qualified with, and I go back and forth between whether it should be the Q3 tyres that they use or the Q2 tyres, because I personally think if you've got in the top 10, you've pushed hard enough, why should you use tyres that are potentially no good? And from a safety aspect, that's probably fair. But if you flip it on its head and say, yeah, but they're in the top 10, and in some tracks where track position is everything, maybe they should have something to work a little bit harder for. Maybe the team should have to work that little bit extra hard. But then if you get someone like an Alfa Romeo and Alfa Tauri suddenly throwing itself in the top 3, maybe, or top 5 even, maybe that's not fair. As in, they might have worked those tyres to within an inch of their life, then they might just do nothing but go backwards once the race has started. Don't honestly know what the right thing is to do. I know on the road we need to look after our tyres, and we need to look after the tyres on any vehicle that you own, even down to your bicycle. But the bridge Formula 1 finds itself in, I think they need to look at going back to a tyre war. So Bridgestone, when we had Bridgestone versus Michelin, or we had Goodyear versus Bridgestone, we need to potentially look at having another manufacturer. But make it so the teams can go back and forth between the manufacturers. So just because your team signed with Pirelli for the entire season doesn't mean that actually in America we're going to use Goodyear tyres, for example. Or Avalon, or whatever make you're going to use. The trade-off is, though, it's going to be even harder to make a car work on those tyres, and 2 different ways might work. For instance, the Bridgestone Duelers used to be really tough and really durable. That's why Schumi could go a lot harder and do so many quali laps. But the Michelins had a lower operating temperature and got up to temperature a lot better. I'd be curious to hear your views on what we need to do, what F1 needs to do to get things working in the tyre department. But I think it should be summed up. Oh God, shoulders. I think it should be summed up as this: F1 needs to be more open to the idea of experimentation. We need to push the idea of maybe more compound types. Maybe stick with the same 3 colours rule, but more compounds to work with. We also maybe need to explore more compounds available, but a simplification of the colours, if that makes sense. We also could maybe look at this specific quality tyres only. Slicks, inters and wets, they're a bit of a unknown, because you could potentially go the entire season without needing them. So it's a tough one to call, but F1 should carry more of those. The team shouldn't be restricted on the running that they do. As in, there's only so many laps those the inters and wets will work. They're the tyres with grooves on, a bit like what we've got back here. as in grooved, not that's a Formula 1 tyre. Far from it. It's a Goodyear, and Goodyear used to be an F1, but that's about as close as the similarities come. I also think F1 needs to be open to the idea of going back to a tyre war. I think ultimately what's hurting Pirelli the most, I think the teams need to look at donating a car to Pirelli. And I know Pirelli used to have a Toyota, I think it was the Toyota that was going to be the 2011 model, if I remember the year correctly. 2010. It was going to be the next year's Toyota after 2000. It's 2010's model. It was going to be the 2010 model, but they used that as much as they could, and they couldn't develop the car. So the teams need to donate a car. I think it needs to be one Mercedes-powered car, one Ferrari-powered car, and one Honda-powered. But that's it. And my phone battery is about to die, so I'm going to wrap this video up quickly. So thank you for watching. Mention in the comments what you think. Like and subscribe. And please send us a video for episode 100, because that's the next one after this. We have made it to 100 official episodes. And we'll go through that one in a little bit. So see you later, and drive safe.